Hi, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, That's Life, I Swear. I'm your host, Rick Barron. Now, what do you do when the door you've spent your entire life walking toward gets slammed shut by your brother? For most people, that's the end of the story. But for David Miliband, it was the beginning of a better one. He was a son of refugees, raised in a home where history wasn't something you read about. It was something your family had survived. He rose to become Britain's Foreign Secretary, one of the most powerful diplomatic voices on the world stage. He was the frontrunner to lead his party, tipped by many as a future prime minister. And then, in the space of a single vote count, it was gone. But here's what makes David Miliband's story different from a story about loss. You see, he didn't retreat. He didn't sit. Instead, he looked at the wreckage of his political ambitions and asked a question that very few people in his position ever think to ask. Where am I actually needed the most? His answer took him to New York, to the helm of the International Rescue Committee, an organization founded by Albert Einstein to help the world's most desperate people, where he has since helped over 36 million lives caught in the crossfire of conflict, climate, and displacement. We're going to explore a man who learned from his family's history that survival is never just luck. It's also the courage of those who chose to show up. This is the story of David Miliband. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of the story. Now, to understand David Miliband, one must first understand the family from which he came. Born on July 15, 1965 in London, England, David Wright Miliband was the elder son of Ralph Miliband, a renowned Belgium-born Marxist political theorist, and Marian Kosik, a Polish-born human rights campaigner, an early member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. His family's history was not merely a backdrop to his life, it was the very foundation. The Miliband family story is one of survival, displacement, and resilience. Ralph Miliband's family fled Belgium in May of 1940 following the German invasion, with Ralph and his father Samuel escaping to England, while the rest of the family remained behind, separated by war and not reunited until 1950. Now, David's mother, Marian, survived the Holocaust in Poland, her life saved by Catholic Poles who sheltered her from Nazi persecution, though her own father, David's maternal grandfather, did not survive. These were not distant historical abstractions for David. When he visited Poland in June of 2009 as Foreign Secretary, he made a point of traveling to the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw to visit his family tomb. While there, he said of Poland, "My mother was born here. Her life was saved by those who risked theirs, sheltering her from Nazi oppression," adding that he considered himself one of the million Britons who have Polish blood. The weight of that heritage, of being the son of refugees, of a family that had known persecution, exile, and loss, would leave an indelible mark on every chapter of David's public life. David grew up in a household devoted to fierce political debate and intellectual rigor. His father, Ralph, was one of Britain's foremost socialist thinkers, and the Miliband home was a place where ideas about justice, society, and power were discussed with conviction. You see, it was an upbringing that nurtured both intellectual curiosity and a profound sense of public duty. Now, David's educational journey was as distinguished as his political one. He attended various prep schools, and then he later transferred to Haverstock Comprehensive School in North London, where he studied from 1978 to 1983, obtaining 4 A-levels and winning a place at the University of Oxford, aided by a Inner London Education Authority scheme designed to support comprehensive school pupils in gaining university access. At Corpus Christi College, Oxford, David studied politics, philosophy, and economics, and he was the classic preparation for British political life. He excelled, graduating with a first-class honors degree a testament to the intellectual sharpness that would define his career. But wait, there's more. In 1988, he won a Distinguished Kennedy Scholarship to study at MIT, where he earned a Master of Science degree in political science. So, conclusion. The combination of Oxford's rigorous liberal arts tradition and MIT's analytical, empirically grounded approach equipped David with a rare dual fluency in theory and in evidence that would distinguish him from many of his political contemporaries. Now, colleagues who knew him during those formative years recalled a young man who was intellectually confident without being arrogant, deeply engaged with ideas but never indifferent to the real-world consequences of policy. It was, in the estimation of those around him, that the profile of someone destined for serious public life. Now, when David returned to the United Kingdom, he began his career at the National Council for Voluntary Organizations before moving to the Institute for Public Policy Research, a progressive think tank with close ties to the modernizing wing of the Labour Party. From 1989 to 1994, he worked as a research fellow and policy analyst, becoming secretary of the Institute for Public Policy Research Commission on Social Justice when it was founded in 1992 by Labour leader John Smith. This was the engine room of Labour's intellectual renewal, the effort to develop a new policy framework that could win back a party that had suffered 4 successive election defeats. Now, it was in this environment that David came to the attention of Tony Blair, who became Labour Party leader in 1994, following the sudden death of John Smith. Blair appointed the then 29-year-old David as his head of policy, a very remarkable responsibility for such a young man, and a sign of the trust Blair placed in him. In this role, David became a central architect of the policy program that would propel Labour to its historic 1997 landslide election victory. Now, his nickname amongst his colleagues in those years, coined by Blair's communications chief Alistair Campbell, was Brains, a tribute to the Thunderbird's puppet character, and a signal of just how widely his intellectual gifts were recognized. Following Labour's victory in May of 1997, Blair appointed David as the de facto head of the Prime Minister's Policy Unit at 10 Downing Street, a position he held until the 2001 general election. In the 2001 general election, David ran for Parliament, and for the first time, winning the safe Labour seat of South Shields in North East England, succeeding David Clark. His rise to the ranks was swift and steady. Within a year of entering the Commons, Blair appointed David Minister of State for Schools, a post just below cabinet rank. By 2004, he had moved to become a minister in the cabinet office, and following Labour's 2005 election victory, he entered the cabinet proper as Minister for Communications and Local Government. Now, a year later, he was given one of the great offices of state when he became Secretary of State for Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs. As Environment Secretary, David made an impact that extended beyond Britain's borders. He was the driving force behind the Climate Change Act of 2008, which established the world's first legally binding national framework for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It was an absolute landmark piece of work, ambitious, scientifically grounded, and politically courageous, and it set a standard that other nations would subsequently seek to emulate. His work on climate policy underscored a consistent feature of his approach to governance, a willingness to think in terms of long-term consequences rather than the short cycles of electoral politics. In June 2007, when Gordon Brown succeeded Blair as Prime Minister, Brown promoted David to become Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, making him, at the age of 41, the youngest British Foreign Secretary in 3 decades. It was by any measure one of the most consequential appointments of the Brown government. As Foreign Secretary, David sought to reorient British foreign policy to acknowledge the damage caused by the Iraq War and to reassert diplomacy and human rights as central pillars of Britain's international engagement. He was trusted by both Blair and Brown, a remarkable political achievement given the legendary tensions between the two men, and was widely regarded as a minister of genuine intellectual and diplomatic stature. His tenure at the Foreign Office from 2007 to 2010 was also marked by his determination to be even-handed in difficult political terrain. Regarding the Israeli-Palestine conflict, David was open about his Jewish heritage, worked to ensure that British policy was seen as balanced and principled. He was an advocate for human rights across different bilateral relationships and used the platform of the Foreign Office to champion international law, multilateral institutions, and the protection of civilians in conflict zones. He and his brother Ed were appointed to Gordon Brown's cabinet at the same time, making them the first siblings to serve in cabinet together since Edward Lord Stanley and Oliver Stanley in 1938, a historical footnote that added a note of dynasty to an already remarkable political story. Now, Labor's defeat in May of 2010 general election brought the curtain down on 13 years in government. When Gordon Brown resigned as party leader, David Miliband entered the contest to succeed him as the front-runner, widely regarded by commentators, and as the candidate who could make Labor electable again. What followed was one of the most painful episodes in modern Labor Party history. After a long campaign in which both Miliband brothers competed, Ed Miliband defeated his elder brother in the final round of voting, winning by a narrow margin on the strength of trade union votes. Now, the result sent shockwaves through the party. David Miliband had led among Labor MPs and party members. It was the union bloc vote that tilted the outcome. This defeat was narrow in numerical terms, but enormous in political consequence. The question of what came next was one that he answered in March of 2013 with characteristic decisiveness and purpose. In March of 2013, David announced that he was resigning his parliamentary seat to take up the position of President and Chief Executive of the International Rescue Committee in New York. He officially started the role on September 1st, 2013. Now, the IRC was not simply a prestigious organization. It was for David a deeply personal one. Founded in 1933 at the suggestion of Albert Einstein, who was himself a refugee from Nazi Germany, the IRC was created to assist those fleeing fascism in Europe. For the son of Jewish refugees, for a man whose mother had survived the Holocaust and whose grandfather had not, leading an organization with such origins was more than a career move. It was a homecoming of the spirit. The scale of this role is enormous. As president and CEO, David oversees humanitarian aid and development programs across more than 40 crisis-affected countries, a global staff of tens of thousands, and an annual budget that has grown significantly under his leadership. In 2024 alone, the IRC served more than 36 million people in countries affected by war, disaster, and displacement. Under David's leadership, the IRC has expanded its rapid response capabilities and deepened its engagement in some of the world's most acute crises, from Syria and South Sudan to Afghanistan and Ukraine. Now, David has used his platform at the IRC to shape global policy debates. He has testified before international bodies, convened policymakers, and written extensively about the political dimensions of the refugee crisis. His 2017 book, Rescue, Refugees, and the Political Crisis of Our Time, argued with passion and precision that the challenge of displacement was not just a humanitarian emergency, but a defining test of democratic values. The premise, as he has described it, is that in rescuing the dignity of refugees, we also rescue our own values as free societies. In 2016, Fortune magazine named him one of the world's greatest leaders, and in 2018, he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, honors that reflected a reputation built across 2 continents and 2 very different kinds of public service. David Miliband's story is, in a very real sense, the story of a family shaped by the worst of the 20th century choosing, in each generation, to respond with engagement rather than withdrawal. His grandparents fled persecution. His parents built intellectual and activist lives in their adopted country. And David himself moved through the highest offices of British government before devoting the second part of his career to the most urgent humanitarian challenges of the 21st century. He is a figure shaped equally by privilege and by purpose, by the opportunities afforded by great education and political mentorship, and by the responsibility he had always seemed to feel towards those less fortunate. Whether drafting policy representing Britain at the United Nations or advocating in Washington on behalf of Syrian refugees, David has consistently brought to his work the same qualities: intellectual rigor, political courage, and a conviction that institutions and individuals working together can change the world. The path of his life from the Downing Street Policy Unit to the Foreign Office to the IRC is not a retreat from politics, but an expansion of it, a recognition that the most consequential questions of our era do not respect national borders, and that those equipped to address them must be willing to go wherever the need is the greatest. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? For me, the most striking is that personal history is not just a biography, it's destiny. David's grandparents were persecuted refugees. His parents rebuilt their lives as exiles in Britain, and he ended up leading the world's foremost refugee assistance organization. Now, this is not a coincidence. It is a long journey of a family's experience finding its most purposeful expression. The lesson? The wounds and struggles of those who came before us can become, if we let them, a compass rather than a burden. The deepest takeaway, perhaps, is simply this: a life shaped by history's worst chapter can still choose to be defined by its best instincts. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which can be found on Apple Podcasts, for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Please be sure to subscribe here or wherever you choose to listen to your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon.